Good morning and welcome to our study of God's Word. I hope that you're doing well today, and I'm thankful that you have elected to join us for this study. As well, I would like to invite you to be our guest today at Pyburn Street Church of Christ. We will gather for Bible study at 9 o'clock, followed by worship at 9:50. We will also gather this evening at 6 o'clock, and tonight Brother Kerry Huter will be delivering the evening message in my absence. Also, we gather at 6 o'clock on Wednesday evenings for midweek Bible study, and we would love for you to come and be our guest at any or all of these upcoming services. Before we get into our lesson for this morning, I would like to tell you a little about an exciting new ministry that we've begun at Pyburn Street to benefit children in the foster care system and those families who are providing for their care. This ministry, which is being directed by Brother Kerry and Sister Jane Huter, is called the Compassion Closet. Often when children are removed from their parents and placed into foster care, they leave with little more than the clothes on their backs. Many foster families lovingly take from their own pockets and purchase needed items for the children in their care, but we want to assist in providing for those needs. Whether it's clothing, diapers, wipes, or some other item that you need, we want to provide you with those things. We know that foster parenting is a challenging but rewarding work, and we see foster parents as the blessing that they are and hope to be able to relieve some of the stress that they face by assisting with these needed items. We have clothing available from newborn through teenage sizes. If you or someone you know is a foster parent or is thinking of becoming a foster parent, we would love to meet them and acquaint them with what all that this ministry has to offer. For more information on the Compassion Closet, please contact Kerry or Jane Huter at 870-810-4879. Last Sunday morning, we began examining the text of Luke 12, verses 13 through 21, which concerns, among other things, an inheritance battle. One individual evidently felt that he was getting shortchanged by his brother and wanted Jesus to settle this legal dispute. Well, the Lord refused to get involved in the squabble, but became very much involved in teaching a lesson on greed, a problem with which many then and still now are being plagued. We read in Luke 12 and verse 15 that he said unto them, Take heed, and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. Friends, covetousness or greed is that insatiable craving to have more, and it can blind one's eyes and rob one's joy. Back in the days when men were seen as very strong, but ships were seen as very weak, there's an old story about a group of men on a boat, and as they made their way to an island that they heard was full of gold, they decided that the men would divide into two groups, those who would dig for gold and cook, and those who would plant seeds and make arrangements for the sustenance of life on the island. Well, their ship finally arrived, and the men began life on the island in a routine way, each fulfilling the task given to him. However, when the first group began to find gold, they recruited more of the people who were planting seeds to become involved in their work. Then more of them came to work in the gold mines, and then more. And by only a handful were involved in cooking and planting, because for most, the quest for wealth had become an all-consuming passion. Well, finally, they began tearing the ship apart and used the wood to reinforce the mining shaft so that they could dig deeper and deeper and find more gold. Well, the story concludes as you would probably imagine. In years to come, as other explorers came to the island, they found a group of skeletons draped over great treasures of gold. Men who had lost sight of their purpose and who had forgotten their future as the craving for more and more literally took their lives. But how appropriate then are these words of Christ that a man's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses? The Lord emphasizes that life with quality doesn't depend upon quantity. It's not how much you have that counts, but what you have. Jesus now gives an illustration or a parable to drive home further this principle. It's the story of a rich farmer whose wealth did not save him, but whose greed did condemn him. And we're introduced to one who, from all outward appearances, was a man who seemed to be a success. For we read in verse 16, "And as he spake a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully." This was a rich man, and one can't fault him for that, as he had gained his wealth honestly. He was a diligent, hard-working farmer. And in the first century, those who were the wealthiest were those who had the most land and who grew the most crops. There was no evidence that this farmer was guilty of fraud or embezzlement or cheating. But one year his ground was very productive. He had what we would often call a bumper crop, and the money was rolling in. So much so, in fact, that even he is taken off guard by the success. Because as we see in verse 17, he thought within himself, saying, "What shall I do? Because I have no room where to store my fruits." But friends, you see, his thoughts were limited to himself. He needed no one else, no input, no advice, no help from anyone. And it's possible that he may have even reasoned within himself, "I've done it all by myself. I owe nothing to anyone. I don't even owe God." He was a self-made man, or so he thought. Again, a man deemed a success in the eyes of the world, but not so highly esteemed by the one who really counts. This farmer's main problem wasn't limited to the size of his barns and his grain bins, but a restricted heart. He was his own worst enemy. And indeed, success often breeds problems. For the farmer, he's run out of room. So much with so little room to store. Too much wealth. So often we would hear people say, "I wish I had that problem. I wish I was like that man and had so much that I didn't know what to do with." Really? Wouldn't such an attitude indicate a measure of greed in our own heart? What would we do if we suddenly came into money by inheriting a fortune or striking it rich in some way? Would we allow it to become a problem for us? Or would we praise God and ask Him what He wants us to do or how He wants us to use our wealth? Well, this farmer has come up with what he believes is an ingenious solution. He says, "This will I do. I'll pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I store all my fruits and my goods." Well, this was a twofold solution. First, he would store his goods in bigger and better barns that he planned on building, pulling down barns and building bigger. Well, this wasn't directly injuring anyone and might have actually helped in providing work for others. But note now the second solution, and this is where his avarice it surfaces. Notice verse 19, "And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry." Simply put, let the good times roll. And what's wrong with that? Is this man really all that evil? After all, he wasn't a murderer or an adulterer, a drunkard, or a thief. His problem was not success or planning for the future or that he had a lot. But his problem was his selfishness and his greed. He thought that materialism brought happiness, that a full barn equals a full life, and he had forgotten about his most precious possession, that being his soul. Now I want you to note again his selfishness revealed by his I problem. As the rich farmer brags, he uses the word I 6 times, and the word my 5 times. He gave no credit whatsoever to God for being so richly blessed. Instead, it was, "This is what I have done, and this is what I will do." Yes, he loved the gifts that he was receiving, but he wasn't returning that love to the one who gave it. He thought that the whole universe revolved around him. And think of all the poor people that the farmer could have helped generously and still have been well off himself. However, he, like so many, had rather hoard than help. And all would not end well for this man, for God passes his sentence in verse 20. God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? We start with the word but. You know, the farmer thought that things could not be any better. But God says that they could not be worse. Then he says, Thou fool. Literally, you're one who lacks good sense. A farmer with no other goal in life than to build bigger barns for himself is one who lacked good sense. He was foolish because he wasn't living with the right aim or the right motive in life. He was foolish because he thought that he had a perpetual lease on life. He had finally made his millions and now had a lifetime to enjoy them. He was foolish because no matter how big he built his barns, he could not escape death, which was going to come for him that very night. But then God asked the question, Then whose shall those things be? Think about that. All of those things that this farmer had worked so hard to hoard up, he said, when you die, what's going to happen to those things? Well, those things were no longer going to be his. The dead must go out of this world empty-handed, or as Paul says in 1 Timothy 6 and verse 7, we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. Now many have stood on their own land and boasted, This is my property. And then they die and someone else stands on the same land and makes the same boast, and this cycle repeats itself over and over again. A very wealthy man from a century ago named J.P. Morgan, whenever he died, 2 gravediggers were standing at his grave waiting for the hearse to bring his casket to be buried. One turned to the other and said, How much money do you think he left? And the other replied, He left every bit of it. For the farmer, his greatest tragedy wasn't what he left behind, but what lay before him, an eternity without God. He lived without God and he died without God. His goal was more money, but his end was hell. When it came to money, he was a millionaire many times over. But when it came to morality, he was spiritually bankrupt. And so notice the application that we can make from this. In verse 21, Jesus said, So is he that layeth up treasure for himself, and is not rich toward God. Friends, there are so many lessons that we can learn from this account. First, unlike this foolish farmer, we need to help and not hoard. Generosity puts joy into one's heart that money never can. And secondly, whatever we have, we should hold on to loosely. Possessions don't last forever, and if I base my happiness on things, then when I lose my things, I lose my happiness. And third, when we plan for the future, we ought to think of eternity. I should be living in such a way that I'm laying up spiritual treasures in heaven. And finally, remember the old saying that you're not ready to live until you're ready to die. And as far as earthly wealth is concerned, think about that farmer and who became a fool. Friends, remember, you cannot take it with you. The things that you take with you are those good works that you've done in this life. Those are the things that will speak for you on the day of judgment, that will be a testament to the way that you've lived your life. Friends, we want to thank you for joining us for our program today, and may God bless you with a wonderful Lord's Day.